Hey, everybody. Welcome to Before the Commit podcast. I'm here with my good friend Dustin. We got a bunch of exciting things to talk about today. We're going to start with a segment on tool of the week. We're going to do news or noise, and then secure or sus, where we'll kind of live threat model a situation where someone might be coding with AI and talk about how somebody might attack that given system. We kind of, in preparation for the meeting, we were thinking about which tool to talk about. And, both Dustin and I, we've been coding in various tools for a while now, Cursor being one of the primary ones. And I myself have started out using plugins in various IDEs like IntelliJ and Visual Studio Code. And one of the issues that I hit early on in my sort of journey in coding was this idea of, thinking about things in terms of tokens or context and trying to, get as many tokens as possible into the LLM to get it to be aware of where things were. And I realized it's really good for writing prototypes and MVPs but not great once you get to a point where the LLM starts losing context of what's going on. And oftentimes it may not lend itself to, if you don't talk to it a particular way, it may not lend itself to good architectural structures. And then, you introduced me to Cursor, and I started to realize that there's more to it than just, it's like a human being. Like, you don't necessarily have, you don't remember everything all at once. You have mechanisms that help you recall parts of your memory in your brain, like mnemonic devices or notes, or you might have an app in your cell phone that allows you to know 2,000 people's phone numbers. It's about knowing where to reference those things. It's essentially how computers operate. Is a computer doesn't have everything loaded up into its memory at once. It has registers to know where those things are. And so, cursor rules kind of lend themselves to creating that architecture, but also you can use Cursor to improve your Cursor rules over time. So that's part of your flow, if you will, of kind of building this thing. So anyway, and then last week, I think Kilo Code came out, or it was public, and we kind of talked about playing around with that. So yeah, I'll just let you kind of, how's been your last week or so messing with Kilo Code?
Well, it's interesting because I think I've had some pretty good results with Kilo Code. By the way, for folks out there, it's KILO code. Um, Cursor is an amazing tool. As you were mentioning, it kind of really kind of most people have used that first and really kind of launched their AI coding experience with that, and really maybe even a little bit before that actually, because most people, I guess, were just taking an LLM, they were copying and pasting their code into like ChatGPT directly or something else out there, and then trying to paste the code back in. And so a lot of these things started off as like convenience devices, like where it was really just about saving you the copying and pasting, and then they started actually changing your code for you. They became true sort of agentic applications as opposed to just asking the LLM and copying and pasting it. Now they're starting to take actions on your code base on your behalf, changing codes and doing console commands, even opening browsers now, taking screenshots and looking at console errors in your browser. So it's pretty incredible how these things have evolved. And you kind of have two main avenues. You have the closed source avenue of Cursor and also Windsurf. And I'm sure there's others out there, but those are the two prominent ones. And at a crux of what these things are doing is they're managing the context for you behind the scenes. When you copy and paste stuff into ChatGPT, the website, what you're doing is you're manually managing the context. You're saying, hey, I'm pasting this code in and I'm asking a question about it, and that's how you're getting your answer. When you're using something like Kilo Code or Cursor or Windsurf, what these applications are doing is they're using AI to manage what the context is. They're also helping make your prompts better. So if you ask a very simple question, it'll make your prompt even more advanced for you behind the scenes. So maybe you don't have to know a whole lot about prompt engineering. Now, the main difference I would say between the open source side of things, the Kilo code, you have Klein, you have Rue code. To be fair to Klein and Rue code, Kilo code is a merge of those two open source projects. So you have Klein, which I think is the original coding assistant in that stack, in that sort of like hierarchy of parent to child. And Rue forked Klein and added a whole bunch of features. And Rue code has been probably one of the most popular and
Are
widely
those other
used.
projects being maintained still, or are they abandoned? Like, why are there so many forks happening so rapidly that are not being like kind of merged back into upstream?
It's a good question. I think that what I've read, at least, and I'm not kind of embedded in these communities and seen the whole history, but at least what I've heard at a high level from comments is that Rue forked off of Klein because I think Klein either wasn't moving in the direction they weren't. I think the commits had started to slow down. Klein had become mature, and I think Rue just had some different ideas of where they wanted to go with it, and I think they wanted to accelerate it, so they forked off of it and started working on it, and it kind of gained steam and became popular. Kilo Code is a project where they take Rue code and Klein, and they sort of take the best features out of both and merge them together. So you're getting a lot of both projects in Kilo Code, but all three of the projects are actually pretty amazing. The one thing I would say that I find actually much better than Cursor with Kilo Code is they have this thing called, well, they really have sort of, I guess the best way to put it is they put you in a workflow that they've designed for you. I think Cursor is a little bit more like free range, and I think they're trying to move in the direction of modes and other types of structure behind what you're doing, like their background tasks with issues driving them from GitLab or GitHub and things like that. But Kilo Code has that right away. They have different modes. There's an orchestration mode, for instance, where when you talk to it, it doesn't have the ability to write any code or change any code at that very moment. All it's able to do is create tasks. And tasks are like a first class object within Kilo Code. So it has these tasks behind the scenes, which are kind of like little tickets or little, in Cursor, we do to-do files, right? You use text files and make markdown to-do files. So, in order to give more intelligence to Cursor, you would have it plan out the project first, and then you'd have it make a to-do file in Markdown or text or something like that. And then you would tell it to work on the to-do file and check things off as it finishes them. And that would be a way of adding, extra structure and extra workflow to what you're doing with Cursor so that you don't just end up with a bunch of craziness. It's the equivalent of planning out your project before you work on it. It's a very smart thing to do. Kilo Code has that built in. So you talk to the orchestrator first. It's creating all these tasks for you behind the scenes, and then it delegates those tasks to the other modes. So there's an architect mode that essentially all it's able to do is create these to-do files. It's not able to change code or anything like that. It creates these markdown files, to-dos. And then there's a coding mode, which is able to do all the coding and change files, etc. And then there's a debug mode, which essentially is just coding mode with a different system prompt that puts it more in like a frame of mind where it's going to go fix a problem for you. And then there's the ask mode, which is you can't change anything. I'm just going to ask you questions, and I want you to answer me without changing anything. So that's similar to Cursor. Cursor has, I think, agent mode, ask mode, and that's really it.
Yeah.
Now, to be fair to Cursor, Cursor has custom modes, so maybe you could construct something like this yourself. But Kilo just has that out of the box. I found that to be incredibly powerful, and I like it much better than Cursor in that regard. Now, to argue a little bit in favor of Cursor, because it's a funded business, I feel like they're subsidizing your usage. Meaning when you pay Cursor, you're getting a whole lot of prompts to some of the top models out there for what I realize now in retrospect is much cheaper than what you would get out if you used it yourself. And what I mean by that is if you use an open source product like Kilo Code and they're just doing a pass through on the pricing of the APIs behind the scenes, you'll realize that you are spending more money with Kilo Code than you are with Cursor doing the same thing. So there is some sort of subsidization going on in the pricing, which I'm sure helps Cursor gain market share. But that's kind of what I see as the main difference in Kilo Code is the addition of orchestration mode. And to be fair to Rue Code and others, who probably wrote most of the orchestration mode themselves, and Kilo has it as part of the fork. I think it was called Boomerang Tasks originally. So folks out there who are using Boomerang Tasks will be familiar with that.
So
yeah.
So I want to kind of take this to the next level. So, one of the things that me and you have been talking about, some of our friends, colleagues, is what is the next generation of coding? All of these are IDE based mechanisms. I think it was about 2 weeks ago, Cursor came out with Cursor Dashboard. I haven't had a chance to play around with it, but the idea seems to be moving. Because I think eventually where we go is that, you're not sitting in an IDE all day because you're still coding, right? The idea is that you become the architect or you become the program manager that's telling the architect, that's telling the debuggers and the coders and the testers, these agents what to do. Why would you need to be in an IDE to do that? So, what is it that's within Kilo Code that may lend itself to, I know we've talked about, you could orchestrate if you have wired your, and it's eventually going to be out of the box. I mean, it's only a matter of time till, there's a solution out there, whether it's Claude Code or, Grok 4 is, we'll talk about this later, is coming out with coding features in Grok 4 that you can go inside of your ticketing system, or you could write a Word document, or you can have a meeting like this where AI is listening, transcribing the conversation, and you're directing high-level architectural decisions, and then agents are making those changes behind the scenes, right?
Yeah. I think that in the short term, it'll be, at least my guess and how I see the market evolving, is I think that in the short term, it's the IDE. So for instance, it's going to be a tool that folks are going to use. There's an on-ramp that these tools have, like with tab assistance and coding assistance. There's others that have done podcasts on this where they've talked about like there's almost like a curve where people start with like the autocomplete and the tab assistance, and then they get more and more trust with the system and they start to go towards agent mode, and then eventually
it's like a personal maturity model almost.
Yeah. And eventually you're having it auto approve everything, like you're just letting it run for 5 minutes and then you're coming back and looking at what it did. And it's kind of getting you more and more comfortable with the idea of delegating a task and then looking at the results later, like you would if you were managing a team of engineers. So I think that in the medium term, it goes towards like almost like engineers become more of a product manager, or maybe they're like a product manager of a feature or a set of features, and they own that feature, and then they delegate tasks like bug fixes and, hey, let's evolve the architecture or refactor this way or that way. Um, so I think everything, I think things become much more planning upfront, and then creating the necessary context in order for your delegation to be successful. And then I think you need a whole bunch of tools to the right for what happens after the AI is done writing the code, to help you analyze and make decisions and it to get better over time. And then I think that, like, to get into what you're getting at, I think you need the coding assistants to have these structures in it. It can't just be like prompt to code. There needs to be an agentic process in the middle
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
where, if I say, hey, I need you to fix this bug, there's a process to that. First, it has to study the code base, because I imagine it's coming in with no context. It doesn't understand the code base. It doesn't have this like memory. Um, you know, LLMs are kind of like Albert Einstein in that movie Memento or 50 First Dates, where you got the smartest person on the planet, but it forgets what you were talking about. When you come in the morning, what you did yesterday, it forgets some of that. Now they're making huge improvements in the terms
Mm-hmm.
of like memory, and they're remembering things that they didn't before. So maybe all that becomes a distant past when
Yeah, but
when
that's
that.
also the equivalent of adding more memory to a machine. Those are like nice optimizations to have, but ultimately you don't move away from memory registers and using certain coding constructs or program constructs, because it's just inefficient to load everything up into a program, into memory at once. It's just like poor optimization technique.
Yeah, and some of it is not just like remembering more of the past conversations you had. Some of it is actually being smart about remembering things. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you bought milk yesterday, it may not remember that, but if you told it like, your goals in life, maybe it remembers that because it's something important.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there needs to be intelligence in when it chooses to remember things, and that
Mm-hmm.
almost requires it to know like intent of like what you're using it for and things like that. It's pretty complicated question. Um, but anyway, there needs to be this structure around how it approaches the job. So it needs to study your code first. It needs to maybe reproduce the problem so that when it fixes it, it can like know it fixed it. There's a whole bunch of things that go into taking on a task, and so you need to have those things built in. I think the boomerang tasks and orchestration mode does a great job of that, and I don't see that same concept in Cursor. And folks who are using Cursor, I use Cursor almost pretty much every day. Um, you have to do that yourself. You have to tell it to build tasks. You have to tell it to reproduce the problem first and then fix it. And these are little tricks. You have to use Cursor rules in order to guide it into a development process and tell it to use like solid principles or some sort of other methodology or
Yeah.
philosophy behind its coding. So Kilo code is doing a little bit of that for you with convenience features, which is nice.
So
Um,
maybe
yeah,
next we should look at cursor agents, like the cursor dashboard, just to wrap our heads around what that is and how it lends itself to this kind of discussion we're having.
I really do see that as kind of like the future. Like maybe we'll be creating tickets, and then the AI agents will have that task delegated to them. They will have an engineering process they go upon, right? Like there are folks out there who will shake their head and say, "Oh, well, the code they'll come back with is spaghetti." But if you build a process around it where they study the code base first, you actually get some surprisingly great results,
Mm-hmm.
like
Yes.
some pretty good results.
Yes.
And I've I've opened up code bases that I have little knowledge about and used a coding agent to become incredibly knowledgeable about that code base just by asking questions. And by the way, while we're on that topic, one of the biggest reasons why you should use Kilo code, or look at it at least, is go inside and look at all the things and how it does it, right? How is it using chain of thought to really agentically approach a problem? Because when you look at tools like Cursor, it's hard to understand where Cursor ends and Claude 4 or whatever your coding model is starts. Like, how much is Cursor doing versus how much of this is just the chain of thought model using tools, etc. So if you look inside of the open source projects, you can get an idea of how these things are built from the ground up, whereas Cursor has it all locked behind a black box on their server side and a code base, etc. And you can't really look at it. So it's definitely worth looking at the open source projects just for your own personal learning, and then use these tools to help study the project in ask mode and learn more about it, the patterns, etc. So the short term IDEs, medium term more like a product manager making tickets and judging the code that comes out of it. And I think long term is, who knows? I mean, you could be in meetings that are being transcribed by AI. The tickets are being created behind the scenes as you're in the meeting, and you might even have PRs to look at when you get back to your desk after getting coffee, from the meeting. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see how this evolves over time.
Yeah. All right, cool. Let's hit the next segment. So next segment, we're going to talk about news or noise. So I've gone through and picked up a couple of different things that are going on in the world of AI that relate itself to ModSecOps. So apparently Apple is considering moving away from their own foundation models in their whole, whatever their, Apple intelligence is, or whatever they're calling it now. They're talking about possibly integrating OpenAI or Anthropic into Siri, which is a different shift away from how they typically do things. I mean, we know like in the early 2000s, they shifted away from PowerPC to Intel and then pivoted back to their own internal processors. This may not be a permanent shift, but a strategic one while they kind of build, they're losing an audience in that. I think they want to, they can't keep pace with they can't keep pace with competitors because this market is moving so fast, and they want to basically maintain a competitive edge by keeping you inside their ecosystem, if you will, right? Like asking questions within a phone. Yeah, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I was very disappointed with Apple Intelligence. I love Apple tools. I have an Apple laptop. I have an iPhone. I feel like, and maybe this is just because it hasn't all played out yet, but I just feel like Apple is not, has not sort of gotten on the AI train the way all the other major tech companies have that are competing with them in it. And I was very disappointed with Apple Intelligence. I don't really use any. I have an iPhone, and I have all this stuff. I don't even use it. I haven't found any of it useful for me in my day-to-day life. Maybe others have. So it wasn't surprising to me that they had started moving in the direction of leveraging ChatGPT and other models. I wonder if this is Apple, like, kind of throwing in the towel and saying they're going to use other AI models. It seems that way when I read it at first. So I don't know, but I'm pretty disappointed in what they produced so far. So
yeah, it definitely is underwhelming.
I wonder if they have maybe a little bit of founder's dilemma.
Mm,
when it comes to this particular, you know, massive pivot that the market's going to do.
mhm,
What's interesting is if you look at all the other competitors you're up against, for the most part, they're all the founders, right? Um, with maybe the exception of Google, who's been doing this probably longer than everybody else. That's another interesting topic is Google, and why they were uh, why did ChatGPT come out before Google launched their model? Was it because of cannibalization of the search market? So Apple and Google have both been interesting for me. I think Google's going to be a big player because they've got so much stuff in their labs, they've got so much talent, et cetera. They've got so much money, and they've got the data. Apple, I'm not so sure about, and it's disappointing. It's also hard to see how they would get back into it at this point. What do you think?
yeah, I mean, I think, um, I mean, the reality is that Apple is not able to keep pace for a variety of reasons. I don't think they'll necessarily disclose all of that. I mean, I
Mhm.
think it could be a talent issue. I think it could be they have their like Apple's not an AI company, right?
Yeah,
They create operating systems, they create hardware, they have a music streaming platform, they have a TV network. It's another thing to have their hands in. So it becomes a bit of a distraction potentially for them. And you can see that in the delivery, right?
hmm,
Not everything that Apple makes is great. I mean, we know that, like, the vision thing wasn't very successful. I had one, returned it in a week. Um, it could be Apple needing time. They may not, like I said, they may not be declaring bankruptcy on it, but it makes sense to not sit around and try to catch up, but to do something to mitigate the issue in the short term. This is what APIs are for. Um, Essentially, the Apple is the interface, right? The phone or the operating system or your home pod. These are all interfaces. The integrations are still going to be things that they're going to have to work through, right? Um, but yeah, I mean, I think the issue that they face is if they don't do something very soon, OpenAI could very easily come out with their own device, right? Their own alternative device,
yeah,
and Apple could start losing market share into their, into and eventually over time, like you might see less hands-on operation, right? Less the things that
yeah,
have made iPhone amazing, like the keyboard, right? Or some of the emojis or things like that. Those things, the next generation of devices are handless, right? You're
yeah,
now talking more in free form you're having more conversations with your devices versus, necessarily, picking up a phone and typing on it, right? It's a little bit ways away.
the
So yeah,
future.
they need to do something. They're going to see their smartphone market slip away or their operating system market slip away for other companies like AI companies starting to create their own devices.
I feel like the future has never been more perilous for them right this very moment because the iPhone has had such a grasp on everything for quite some time, and I just see an existential threat coming over the horizon. Like, I think the only reason why it hasn't happened yet is because AI hasn't found its form factor yet, its interface yet. But once somebody figures out what that looks like and
Mm-hmm.
what it's supposed to be, and that catches on, then I think Apple's in potentially a world of hurt at that point.
Yeah,
Um,
and think about like Android. Like Android has, Google has their own phones now. Like it used to
yeah,
be that, Apple made their own devices and their own OSs, but now you have, Gemini is not nearly as nice as some of the other LLMs out there, but it's significantly better than what Apple has.
they've got they're in trouble because they have two highly financed competitors, like huge pockets. You have Google, who, like you said, took the opposite route of not building their device. They're not vertically integrated in that way, um, but they've got a real deal operating system. And then you've got folks on the other side of the equation, like you've got even the Teslas of the world who can build their own devices and can build their own hardware coming into the market of AI and has deep pockets, uh, you know, with with billionaire founder and everything like that. Um, so it's tough. It's going to be interesting to see what Apple does, but I worry about it from their perspective.
Yeah, we could pivot into a related news topic.
Hmm.
I've been seeing you know reels and things on social media, resurfacing things that Steve Jobs said about when Adobe was trying to poach Apple engineers, and he
Hmm.
was saying, we don't do that. We don't take Adobe engineers, and we expect Adobe not to do the same. But um, yeah, and I know that I know there was a while a while back where you know a lot of the Silicon Valley companies were sharing salaries with each other because
Hmm.
people were kind of playing their hand and going, bouncing between, some of the bigger, the Facebooks, the Googles, the LinkedIns, all these companies that were paying top dollar, and they
Yeah.
were just kind of driving the price up. But now you're seeing a very aggressive talent acquisition strategy. Meta support reportedly offering substantial compensation packages up to $300 million over 4 years, and stealing away talent from OpenAI and Apple. And it's a very aggressive recruitment strategy, and it's basically underscoring that you know this desire to assemble like the best AI researchers in your team so that you might influence the landscape of what's going to happen next, right, and be on the forefront.
Yeah. It's it's the early days. It's like the wild, wild west right now. You know what I mean? Like so much value is in, you know, the next steps that people take, like who figures out the next ripple. Um, it's interesting. I don't know much about the compensation packages. I totally get it. Why I think also there's some talk in that article about it being exaggerated a little bit. Meta is like saying, "Oh, it's exaggerated," um, which also is in their best interest to say it's exaggerated because they don't want everyone coming in just the number to go out of, out of left field. Um, so it makes total sense. Now I wonder, is there a moat, like when a company, let's say an AI researcher comes up, like chain of thought, right? Chain of thought was like an interesting idea. I'm sure whoever came up with that idea, it was brilliant, but everybody else jumped on it right away. Like, how much moat is there to a new idea? Um, like, are these researchers going to come up with a new idea that has moat? I guess that's a real question. Is are these foundational models going to commoditize? Like, are they just going to become like interchangeable with each other? Grok 4 is coming out, I think, in a couple of days. It's been announced, and you know, I it almost sounds like from their own admission, they're saying, "Oh, this is going to be the best one out there," but it's incrementally better. It's not like this earth-shattering thing. And I wonder if all the foundational models are going, the big name models are going to commoditize in that way, where they're just incrementally better from each other, but they don't necessarily have like a secret sauce that makes them head and tails better than one or the other.
Yeah, it seems like a very legitimate article. That it was in the original article was in Wired magazine.
Hmm.
Not everybody makes that amount. It's not like, you're an AI engineer, they're going to write you a $100 million check. These are very
Yeah.
specific people.
Well,
But
even if I was writing that check, I'm going to tell everybody it's exaggerated because I don't want the next person to come in to say I want more than the last
yeah,
guy.
yeah, but there are pay bands at Meta, E7s that make on average 1.54 million a year.
Yeah.
Cool. So here's another interesting one. Have you ever heard of HTTP 402? It's not like one you hear before. Well,
No.
it's 401 and 403, right? Those are like
Hmm.
unauthorized access denial, forbidden.
Yeah.
Unauthorized is 401, 403 is forbidden, right? So these are
Hmm.
like auth Z, auth N based things. And
Yeah.
404 is page not found, right?
Yeah.
So 402 is actually a HTTP code that's for payment required. So
Oh.
Cloudflare is apparently
Yeah.
allowing website owners to block crawlers from hitting their site and charge payment to crawl their site for like creative works.
Mm.
So yeah, it's a beta feature that was just released, I believe, last week, and potentially uh, disrupting how AI systems may actually train on new content. And a lot of the deep research stuff, right, relies
Hmm.
on crawling real time. So not just
Right.
training, but like if you're to research a topic and want the most up-to-date data, a lot of these, LLM interfaces now allow you to kind of crawl real time, do some unattended research, right? Go have
Yeah.
lunch and come back, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, so the ripple effect that this could have on AI training data and broader implications. I mean, think about how many websites use content delivery networks. Like if other
Hmm.
CDNs like Akamai or Fastly, or again, here we have Cloudflare, kind of using it as part of their strategy to kind of monetize, allowing you as a creator to have more
Hmm.
restriction and monetization. And the way around this is that, if you decide to opt in, you would create a Cloudflare account, and then it uses like an asymmetric algorithm using an elliptical curve, essentially private and public key. So you generate a key, and then you kind of enhance your service to pass this key along to the website. But think about, there could be like lots of lots of this happening. So yeah, what's your take on this?
When I originally read that or saw that article, um, it was just kind of like Cloudflare is offering a way for people to opt out of these bots hitting their website, um, because and the article was explaining that the Claude bot and other bots that are out there from these LLMs are creating performance issues of some sort to these websites, increasing the traffic substantially, etc. And that this was a way of opting out of it. My hot take of it was like, oh, this is kind of like opting out of the robot, having a robots.txt to opt out of a search engine. And like, you're kind of like potentially cutting out yourself from society. It's kind of like, I don't want search engines to crawl my website, so then nobody's ever going to find my website. It's great if you're a private website and you want to be crawled, but um, so you're kind of cutting yourself off from that search or
Mm.
whatever. Now, to argue, are you getting search from Claude? No, it's just taking the information you have and giving it to the user, and nobody's ever visiting your website at all. That's human. But then when you just mentioned, you said like micro payments, you can have, they don't
You can
actually
charge.
legitimate. They're charging Claude for.
No, you can charge whomever.
Yeah.
So
Now, do they actually anticipate that is going to be like money's going to flow through that, or is that just like
yeah,
a way of
pay per
shutting off?
crawl pay per crawl grants domain owners full control over their monetization strategy. They can define a flat per price request across their entire site. Publishers will then have three distinct options for a crawler. One, allow the crawler to free access to your content. Two,
Hmm.
to charge to require payment at a domain wide price, or block deny. And I'm
Yeah.
sure you could eventually create specific rule sets. So you could essentially monetize your site through charging crawlers. Each crawler would pay, like, so Anthropic might pay, or
Hmm.
whatever, depending upon the content. Like if you're serving up very important content, like for example, like X could
Hmm.
decide to put their stuff behind Cloudflare and
Hmm.
charge crawlers for their content,
Yeah.
or decide that they're not going to use that as a source of truth.
Yeah. Honestly, I think, like, I wonder if it's going to catch on. Like, if crawlers are going to, if I wonder how the market's going to approach it. Right? Are they going to fight it? Are they going to embrace it? Are they going to, um, ask for Congress to come in and, you know,
Well,
so much of the stuff with AI is like, the two sides, like, fair use, right? When they talk about fair use, the people who are on the side of fair use are saying, well, you know, if you don't have fair use, then China's just going to win because they're gobbling up the entire internet and using it for AI. And if you don't have fair use for everything on the internet that you can grab, then we're just going to lose in the AI battle, and that's it. But then there are some real serious questions about, like, well, is this compatible with, you know, our laws? You're just gobbling up everything on the internet and then using it as training data. Maybe you need to pay for that data.
who steps in this case? Because yeah, sure, the U.S. companies can restrict, right? But
Hmm.
what about in the case of a non-U.S. company, right, where
Yeah,
the internet
exactly.
is not really got borders or constructs of those natures? I know there's certain mechanisms out there, like governmental mechanisms out there, but you know,
Everything has unintended consequences. You could pass a fair use law, and then all the AI companies just set up shop outside the border, and then you
mhm.
haven't you haven't really changed anything except for hurt yourself. Um, so it's a fair question. Now, um, I've never seen someone actually produce the mechanism for which someone would charge these companies, and this is the first time I've seen that. So that's very interesting. I wonder if it'll catch on. Um, I wonder if the business model is still sound if you need to pay for all your data. Um, it's a good question. Now, the question I would have is this just based on their crawling for training data, or is this also like if I do like a deep research and it's using like a browser tool to go make a Google request to go look at that right now, is that also being blocked? Because
I'm
there's a little bit
assuming
of a.
so. I'm assuming so, but I
Mhm.
haven't fully read into the whole mechanism of like how they so there's a thing called WebBot off, right? They've
Yeah,
created like a mechanism, but like we know that there's ways to impersonate a real human being to gather
yeah,
content, right? So, I'm sure there are things being, thought through about how to get around it. But I imagine that whether you do deep research, or you are doing like if you ask an LLM like what's going on today,
mhm,
in the past, like maybe 6 months to a year ago, would not know what you were talking about because it was
yeah,
trained on a snapshot of data, whereas LLMs have more of capabilities to know what's going on real time or semi real time by
yeah,
kind of having sources it looks at. So, but yeah, I would imagine this would affect deep research as well.
yeah, yeah. I mean, its ability to figure out what's happened today is not much better than it's been 6 months ago. Now it can go search Google for what happened today.
Yeah.
But but yeah, I mean, there's others like Grok who are saying they have like the whole Twitter at their fingertips, so they can give you an up to date. But still, what are people talking about on Twitter today? Um, so it's not like, I don't think they have, and maybe I'm wrong, someone can correct us out there. I don't know if they have everything that happened today in a vector database for like a semantic search available versus them just opening up a web browser and searching for today's date on Google and then getting the first 10 results and then coming back to you and saying what happened today. Um, that's an open question that I'd love to know the answer to. I believe it's the latter. I believe it's just doing a Google search.
Yeah, and it also kind of lends itself to like some of the things we've been talking about, the kind of ad markets, right? Like, um, with this, zero click kind of world that we live in when it comes to, searching for things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Many people search, there's, I think, a variety of reasons why people search, but like in my head, there's two main reasons why people are searched. They're looking for information or they're
Mm-hmm.
looking for a service or a product, right? And
Yeah.
so if you're to kind of segregate those two things, when you're looking for information, the old way of doing things is you would go into, your search bar and you would, search, or you'd go to Google or some other search engine, and then you would click through until you found the sources that kind of answered what you were looking for, which might be Wikipedia or something else. Now, when you search in Google or some other site, Meta actually responds. There's almost no need to scroll down below the fold and look at
Mm-hmm.
any sites. But you could argue that many people have already shifted away from asking Google for answers about things and are now shifting into using an LLM to ask questions, but also providing other context, because normally when you search, context doesn't have that sort of, uh, it doesn't have context about why you're searching for it, or maybe there's some search history, but if you're browsing anonymously but whereas an LLM can learn more about you over time, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if you've ever asked, an LLM to roast you or to describe who you are as a person, but
Yeah.
it knows who you are if you've logged in, and it keeps track of kind of your habits. And because it has that context, it can kind of respond in a way that's very unique and useful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so then it kind of leaves like the other kind of portion of it, which is if you're searching for a product or a service. But even now with things like deep research and web searching, I find myself using search engines less and less. So now you have
Yeah.
this concept of Cloudflare that people may start blocking. It's still early to say, it's still really new. And also Google has a model where they are kind of, using site engine optimization or selling ads. They're kind of, this is kind of being cannibalized by the whole LLM market.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of rumors or a lot of talk. I'm not sure how much of this is confirmed or if it's just speculation, but that that Google had, um, chatbots a long while ago, and I think that whether it was like reputational, they want to make it safer, they want to make it better, or whether it was that they were worried about the search engine cannibalization, um, that led them to not release it. But hypothetically, I imagine that they probably could have been the first out there before ChatGPT, based on what they had. Um, and for whatever reason, they chose not to go out early. Um, and I and maybe this is just my own wrong opinion, but it almost has looked like they've been playing catch up ever since. Like when ChatGPT came out, it was kind of like, oh man, the band-aid is being torn off, whether we
Mm-hmm.
like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And then everything since then has been kind of how you would react if someone had done that. Um, Now I do feel very optimistic about Google because they've just, they've been preparing for this feature for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So they have, deep pocketbooks. They have, the whole labs concept where they've got things that they've probably got patents on things that we don't even know about. They haven't been just doing LLMs. They've been doing other types of models like physics models and genome
VO3
and,
looks awesome.
they have arguably the largest catalog of video.
from
You know, I
YouTube.
think that when all is said and done,
Mhm.
when the AI, you know, when the inner workings of how to make the neural network and the inner workings of how to train a model has all become commoditized to the point where everyone knows how to do it. And even if you don't know how to do it, you could ask the LLM or ask the coding agent to do it and it'll do it for you. So really what matters at the end of the day is your infrastructure and your data. And that's really what's going to matter at the end of the day. And then I think infrastructure is going to be less and less, because I think there's going to be like this idea that, like, when, kind of like the housing market, where there's like, where now GPUs and data centers are all the rage. Everyone's going to build, and eventually we're going to get to this point where we have too many data centers and too many GPUs. And then I think even the hardware is going to start to commoditize, where it's like maybe 100 or 200 years from now, a child is commanding like a 300 GPU cluster,
Yeah, yeah.
and training his Roblox, or something
Or
like that.
building a startup, you
Yeah, or
know.
building a startup. So my point is that I like to look at it from the perspective of, okay, who has the advantage when it comes to infrastructure and when it comes to data, and then who has that magical, like, process that's creating data for themselves, right?
Mhm.
Like Google has YouTube, and it's continuing to create video data as people upload more and more videos. And it's becoming almost like a TV. Like, I watch YouTube probably more than I watch Netflix at this point.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, easily, by far.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think that that's what really matters at the end of the day. And that's why I think that Google's a player. It's why I think that XAI is a player, because it has Twitter. I mean, I honestly, personally believe Tesla is a player because they have all this video data from all these cars driving around, and then all the inputs from the person driving it. So it's like you have the question, which is, what do I do if the world looks like what I see out of these 8 cameras right this very moment? And then the
Mhm.
answer is what the human driver did, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
And then you just train on that over and over and over again. And before you know it, your AI is basically a human driver, you know?
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I keep on coming back to that. The people who have those loops where they're getting the data and they're training on the data in a loop, it's almost automated at this point. I don't think anyone's ever going to catch up to those people. I think they're just going to become the best AI in that category, and then it's a question about whether those evolve into like super intelligence, or whether you have to put them all together as a bunch of experts in different categories, and then that's where the question, I think, in my head goes.
Yeah, speaking of Twitter, they bought Grok not too long ago, or Grok bought
Yeah,
Twitter. I think it's the other way around.
yeah,
Grok 4 is coming out, the live stream tomorrow, and they're talking some of the kind of testers, people who have beta access, have posting screenshots of
the
them
API, yeah,
releasing their own version. Well, API, but not only that, their own version of something like Claude Code. So being able to code directly, it looks almost
yeah.
like Visual Studio in a web browser that's hooked directly into Grok. But also, supposedly, you could use it inside of Cursor, that you could actually click a button and like
Yeah.
using Cursor button. So that'll be
Hmm.
really interesting. I'm sure we'll have more to talk about next week.
Yeah. Well, you can use um, Grok 3 in Cursor, I
Oh, okay.
believe. Um,
I
it,
wasn't aware there
my
was an API.
It's a little bit, yeah, there is an API for Grok 3. It's a little bit fuzzy.
Okay.
But in my experience, Grok 3, for whatever reason, just hasn't been as good as like Claude 4, Claude 3.7. And I think, if I remember correctly, they didn't have the thinking on the version of Grok 3 that thinks. They didn't have the chain of thought model inside of Cursor. Maybe that's changed and I haven't gone back and looked at it. But like Claude 3 or 3.7 and Claude 4, I guess, at this point as well. Has been kind of the bread and butter of coding. You just see in my opinion, such a great deal of difference in the quality that comes out of that model. Now, others have said that, Gemini 2.5 is amazing as well. Um, but, what's interesting is when dealing with these models, it's very hard to like have a bake off. It's kind of like I I know Danny. He's a great engineer. I'm going to go with him because I've worked with Danny for a while. You know what I mean? But how do I know whether uh, Fred over here is a better engineer than Danny? I would have to devote some time working with Fred for a while, and maybe I just don't want to do that right now.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of that when it comes to models too, which is interesting. You kind of get a familiarity with that personality and with that intelligence, and you start to trust it, and you start to say, maybe Gemini 2.5 is 2.5% better, but uh, Claude's
You have
my
creature comfort with it.
yeah, Claude's my friend, and I'm used to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe not
Yeah. It's
friend,
very interesting.
but
Yeah.
you get what I'm saying. It's like, it's not like, you know, it's not like a physical product. It's more like a personality, right? Like if it was like, this cup leaks 2.5% less than the other cup, I would just toss my old cup out and buy a new one because I don't care.
Yeah.
All I
Yeah.
care about is the better cup. But with an AI coding assistant or any AI, there's a familiarity that you get with it. And also, it's more like comparing two people than it is comparing two products. There's far too
Mm-hmm.
many variables for you to have a black and white comparison, if
Yeah.
that makes any sense.
Yeah. But also there could be some magical integration, like we were talking about earlier. So we've kind of run up against the hour. We didn't actually get to our last segment, but that's okay. We'll get to it next week.
Oops.
Yeah, no, it's fine. We had plenty of things to talk about. We probably could have kept talking for another hour, but staying true to the format and the segment. Thank you all for joining the first version of Before the Commit podcast. Really want to thank you all for being here. This will be. Thanks for joining. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks, Dustin.
Take care.